Okay.
Hi. Hi, Edie.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We barely gave you 15 minutes to run around. I was lamenting that I didn't have a chance to get a cup of tea, but other things that had precedence. So it's just I'm gonna dance around and chat here because people are coming on board, and I don't want to get started until we get up there. And with 350 people, it takes a while to get on board. So so Drew, do you have another minute or two to relax, because we're up at 50? So we're gonna wait for the numbers to go up. It was a hard choice this afternoon. We have our consultant Eve Addis doing a workshop opposite us on how to become a trauma responsive organization. So so it's how do you start to change and how do you become trauma responsive was a hard choice.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, while people are coming on, I'll probably just reflect further on the attorney issue. And as I think of, I always look at where people are, what's their training and orientation. And the attorneys that I have worked with have tended to be more in hierarchy as I reflect, because they come from finance as well,
Yeah.
or they're driving finance.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to stereotype at all, because I've worked with nurses who, and social workers who, grew up in the military and may be more hierarchical than those who come from a community setting. So I just think that where we're raised and what skill sets we're raised with, some of our family values, those all impact our
styles. It's really about who we are. I mean, I'm a social worker. I went to social work school, and there was everybody in there from, the most, the most rigid to the least, and all in between. So we take ourselves with us wherever we choose to go.
You sure do.
For the better or the worse. Okay, well, folks are still coming in, but I think we'll get started anyway. And so those of you were all there this morning. So I'm hoping you were all there this morning, but we may have a person or two with us today. And so this session is meant to be a deeper dive into looking at organizational assessment, organizational change, especially looking at the competing values method with our wonderful consultant, Drew D. Giovanni from Open Minds. And Drew has a ton of experience in leadership positions throughout our field and the field of healthcare, and really had a very enlightening discussion this morning about a model that was fascinating that could lead us into organizational change. When we planned this was a hands-on session of filling out the matrix and really assessing your organization's change in person. But now that we are virtual, I really encourage you to chit-chat away in that chat room. I am going to try to stay on top of it with questions and answers, and probably will interrupt you in this one, Drew, in the middle of your talking if a comment comes up that I want to address right away. So if all of you would bear with us, you've been wonderful in bearing with moving our executive seminar into the virtual world. I really, really appreciate it. As does Harvey and Len and all of our staff. So we are going to move. I see some chats coming in, but as soon as I shut my mouth, I'll go in there and look at the chats. The first thing we did was put in the second book that Drew mentioned, because it wasn't there. So anyway, without further ado, there it is. Without further ado, and with great anticipation, I turn our breakout session over to Drew D. Giovanni.
Thank you. And this session will be a lot more casual. We'll have a couple of discussion sessions here. As Edie had mentioned, we had originally planned to actually do the assessment in the
True.
session.
I have to just stop you for a second, because one in the chat box from the person who asked the question about it, he is an attorney, and he said that he would agree it's hierarchy. so, so you've given me a chuckle. So I thought I'd
Thank you.
share.
Thank you, Edie. Well, in a live audience, I could turn it back to the group and say, hey, when attorneys in the audience, what do you think?
Right.
Anyway, we will be more casual here. We'll be chit-chatting, and again, we put it into the box. This is a more in-depth book on organizational culture and leadership by Edgar Schein. Many of you have perhaps read Helping or Humble Inquiry, really well-known books by Edgar, who's just a terrific, tremendous human being. And then we had intended to actually have you do the assessment in this concurrent session when we were planning for a live program. We thought it was awkward to be having a 20-minute silence period. So I'd encourage you to get the book, Diagnosing and Changing Organization Culture. It's got the assessment tool. You can actually copy it, have your teams do it. You can have that facilitated if you like. Do know that you will see differences, and I typically will put everybody's profile on one page as like a composite because we do see kind of different perceptions, and there's important reasons for that.
Sure, let me jump in one more second before you begin, because there were a couple comments in the chat box that might move you as you move through your slides and start to talk about things. So there was one question about, are you going to discuss instruments to assess culture? And another one that said, can you speak to a way to keep culture in discussion in a collaborative way within the hierarchy, which is often driven by funding? So again, they're not questions for you to answer, but things for you to think about maybe addressing today as you move forward. Unless you want to answer them.
Well, thank you. And let's have further discussion about the hierarchy piece so we can kind of process that a little bit. I think that to the first piece, you can purchase a Diagnosing and Changing Organization Culture by Dr. Ken Cameron and Robert Quinn. And you'll have the assessment tool based on the competing values framework that's been well validated. It's pretty sensitive and it's fascinating to see that, and also to see that people on your leadership team may answer it differently. Sometimes I've gone into organizations and I'll do a session for senior leadership, and I'm invited back to do a session for the frontline leaders and supervisors and so forth, and the discussions are just as rich and insightful, but sometimes the perceptions are a little bit different. So considering the strategy, our learning objective is to consider strategies to support the alignment of your organization culture with strategic initiatives. So this is saying, you know, there's some dynamic happening internally or externally, and strategically you're wanting to make some change, or in this environment, you might be having to make a quick change very quickly. And so we're going to be talking about the general strategies and then specific strategies to move in or out of a particular quadrant in the competing values framework. And I'll mention that this came up in a session we were working with a crisis call center, and on March 15th, if you look at this, they initiated the decision to move everybody remotely. This was 240 employees across 5 different sites. And by March 22nd, which was a week later, over 98% of the employees were working from home. And all of their equipment was dispersed. So it shows that some of us can be nimble. It's not so easy in other organizations. And I just want to come back to this rule. We're not here to judge and say, oh, this is not the right culture profile. Every culture profile is unique, and it's there to serve your organization, but you may wish to be making some strategic changes if it's not serving you, or you're needing to move into a new realm internally or externally. As we review the competing values framework, I'd like for you to take a minute to reflect on your dominant culture. Is it clan? which is very focused on teamwork, communication, feeling like a family? Is it hierarchy? Is that the dominant culture? You're going to have all four of these in your organization. But what really stands out? Hierarchy being a lot of processes, procedures, a chain of command being dominant, adhocracy being more likely to be a startup organization, very innovative, flying by the seat of everybody's pants. Some healthcare organizations that are small remain in adhocracy. I worked for an FQHC that remained there probably until they were accredited. And then market, running like a business, growth, measuring outcomes. I think this is going to be the least dominant for most healthcare organizations, but not necessarily so. So think of these four quadrants. What is your dominant culture? Let's move to the poll.
So I'm going to jump in again as people are going to the poll with some things I'm getting in this comment box. And this is important because if you all, just to take a minute to listen to me, go down to in the chat box where it says 2, and if yours, and click the little arrow and make sure it says all panelists and attendees. Because what's happening is your questions aren't going in the chat box and your comments. If it says to panelists, it's only going to me. So a number of people are saying, what are you answering? What's coming in? So do me a favor, guys. Hit that 2 button, go to all panelists and attendees, and share alike. I'm sorry, Drew. Thank you.
Thank you, Edie. Glad to get that cleared up. And so what is your dominant organization culture? What do you believe? Without actually going through a validated measurement tool, you probably have a pretty good sense of it. Is it plan, market, adhocracy, or hierarchy? I'm going to back the slide up here. Just take another moment to click on the box, on the button, and then click submit. And we'll show our answers.
I'd be curious about this one. Oh.
Very interesting. We're seeing hierarchy as the most common dominant culture. And that could be for a variety of reasons. We may have a number of people with government organizations or mature organizations, also accredited and licensed organizations. If you've gone through accreditation, I've been through Joint Commission, HHHC, and CARF many times, and it just drives us into a whole new realm in a good way. But certainly, those of you even who have dominance in hierarchy are going to have a lot of clan. We see clan as the second most common dominant aspect of culture, followed by market and adhocracy. You know, I see adhocracy also in organizations who are doing clinical trials, research, but typically smaller organizations and organizations that are newer. So thanks for filling out the poll. Very enlightening.
Yeah, you know, Drew, a couple of people are saying that a hard time answering it because they see aspects of it all.
They did when you have all of it.
And some are saying it was clan, but it became hierarchy. It's clan, it's moved to more market-based.
So you're describing like that their organization is having a dynamic change and transition. Well, I think we've got, you know, as we talked about the drivers, value-based reimbursement being one of them, which I'll get to in a moment, but even this trend from being a nonprofit organization, by the way, some of you may be, again, government organizations or have a parent corporation. You might be part of a larger health organization, maybe even a system. And that's going to make you a little more hierarchical as well. Some are going to be nonprofit. I go back to my early career when my CEO used to, he said, I'm going to write a beg letter. And it was a letter, you know, asking for money because we needed some new initiative. We never had anything in the bank. We kind of lived month to month and week to week. And we were running by the seat of our pants. And that's kind of an adhocracy. It was the day, we were expected to do that because we were branded as poor and saying, give us money, please, donate us. We've got a great mission, but we don't have any money. And I think that over the late 90s, early 2000s, and since, we've really been in an environment that is expecting nonprofit organizations to have healthy margins reserved and being maybe more in that market focus, shifting there a little bit. So that's been one driver. And the other is value-based reimbursement, to be a data-driven organization and to be demonstrating outcomes. This is great for the people that we serve. We can say, oh, here's how we're doing. We didn't know in the past. We didn't know whether we were helping people. Pat had just talked about a lot of data even coming out of the 1800s, but we haven't always had that. So I think that we're thinking about taking those incremental steps to probably be moving our organizations a little bit to the right, maybe from clan into market and maybe from hierarchy into adhocracy. We're needing a little more innovation. We're certainly needing it right now. And remember that you only have 100 points to spread across this grid. So when you make a change from clan, well, let's say we're needing a little more market, we're going to be more data driven, we're going to be more outcomes focused because of value-based reimbursement. Maybe we scored a 15 or a 20 in the past, and we know 2 years from now we're going to have to be scoring a 30. We're going to be having to shift that to the lower right, and that means we're taking points away from someplace else. Usually we're taking away from the opposite quadrant in the diagonal. Not always. Sometimes we're needing to take away from hierarchy as well, or adhocracy, but just know that we're typically going to be making a shift to the right, and I'm encouraging everybody to take small steps. Kim Cameron says, you know, that small step will take as much effort as a large step. So be careful what you're doing. Make a small change at a time. So let's go through some general leadership strategies for organization culture change. I want to talk about leadership style because it's definitely an impactful aspect of culture. Expanding leadership competencies, which means doing leadership and professional development with your leadership team, both at the senior level and perhaps at the frontline level, absolutely, and maybe even some staff reorientation as well. And using levers for change, recruitment, orientation, incentives. We'll talk about the pros and cons of that. I have mixed feelings about incentives, and we'll talk about aligning performance goals with organization goals. How can we use a performance management system in a very positive way to help shift culture as well? What dominant culture is Mr. Rogers driving? We love this. He's just come back out. Tom Hanks has portrayed him in the movies, and there are 3 ways to ultimate success. The first way is to be kind. The second way is to be kind. The third way is to be kind. Now, I will tell you that somebody in a cutthroat sales organization that's selling software for IBM or for Microsoft might not necessarily agree with this. So this, I would say, is definitely a clan culture kind of philosophy and way of thinking. And it is important for us to be kind, particularly in our organizations. If you've seen The Devil Wears Prada, this is just a great scene that I like to use in leadership development, where she's saying, "Why is no one ready?" She was definitely driving a hierarchical, very much in control culture, and being a leader who needed to be in great control, and nothing probably could really happen without her decision or approval. So where are the leaders in your organization from a leadership style perspective? Some of you may be familiar with Montagn's leadership grid. I use Jay Hall's assessment tools, with styles of leadership assessment, and some of the other assessment tools. Thomas Kilman, conflict mode assessment, also can help people think from a conflict perspective how they're leading the organization. And along this grid, we're looking at a concern for task or goal, along one axis, the x-axis, and then the other one we're looking at how much concern for people. So if we're seeing a high concern for task or goal and a low concern for people, we're going to see that Miranda Priestley produce or perish, very kind of maybe what some people might call a military, but a very authoritarian leadership style. And that might tend to drive a little bit of hierarchy. So it's something to be thinking about. In healthcare, we do see maybe low concern for goal. I think as a profession and as an industry, we've struggled with this because we're so people oriented that sometimes there's a tendency towards the country club, or what I would call a 1-9 style. Again, lower concern for task, higher concern for people. That's our orientation and how we serve people as well. And ideally, we have that 9-9, high concern for people and task. And that takes a lot of effort, I think, for leaders to develop that team style. I worked for years to become a 9-9 leader, and I feel like even when I would get there, you know, how could I sustain it? It's not easy to do on a day-to-day basis. And under stress, you fall back to a secondary style. I also raise on here this 1-1 style, or that we see the impoverished. We see the 1-1, the low concern for people or low concern for task. We do see burnout in our helping professions, and we see it in our leadership. It's harder to drive change when we have individuals who are having some level of burnout. I think we all have some level, but when it's really acute or chronic, that's a concern as well. I then just would challenge organizations to be considering an ongoing process for leadership development to adopt that 9-9 style, which helps us really drive a more balanced culture and helps us drive change in our organization no matter what we're doing. It helps us to really involve, engage the people that are working on our teams, whether they're clinicians, staff, volunteers, to stay engaged, to feel like they're part of the change process, to be empowered. It's very much part of the empowerment model as opposed to that Miranda Priestley style where they're being told what to do. It's easier to be top down, but in the long run, we don't have the ownership and the engagement that we might otherwise, and we may not be moving in the direction that we want to. I'll mention here, yeah, being aware of the 1-1 or that impoverished style, and that 5-5, which is kind of in the middle of the road, which is compromising. It's actually one of the least desirable styles, because I'd rather somebody being maybe overprotective by being high for people and low on task, or high on task and low on people, than somebody who's compromising throughout their leadership tenure. So we're expanding the competencies of the leadership team. We looked at this developmental model earlier, and so let's say we're needing to be, we're operating in silos. We're developing some new service lines, and we're wanting to be more interdisciplinary in our approach. And we need to drive a little more collaboration in clan. Then, you know, do our leaders have the ability to be facilitators, mentors, and team builders? If we're moving towards a more market-driven need, like value-based care, do we have people who have the skill set to present data and help our team members understand, our clinicians value outcomes data? It can be very positive to say, hey, look at how well we're performing, or ooh, we're doing great here, but we need to maybe improve here. How can we help people think about the need to serve the populations in a more effective way? And I don't know in our organization that we have to necessarily be a hard driver, but we might have to be a little more competitive. We might have to produce more in a different way. Same thing with in adhocracy. We need to be more innovative, entrepreneurial, visionary, or do we need to be more, have the skill set to be organized? My approach is that this is a team effort, and I'd like to see a holistic team. Not everybody has that skill set, but at least a senior leader, a CEO, executive director has that ability to leverage the skill sets or bring on to the team the skill sets that are necessary to fulfill all of these quadrants. I once worked for a CEO, actually this is when I worked for an FQHC. It had originally been a county facility, a county clinic, behavioral health services, primary care, preventive care, dental health, and we added addiction treatment as well. It had budded off from the county with 16 employees moving over to a nonprofit, forming an FQHC, getting a 330 grant, still kind of very much in an adhocracy mode. But my CEO was constantly developing a new service line. I always felt like I was an operations leader, and felt like I was cleaning up after her, putting in the infrastructure, running behind, because it was just something new all the time. And we really value that. It didn't create a very stable organization, but we knew that our senior leader and someone on our team was innovating. If we've got all the leaders kind of focused on hierarchy, we need to make sure that there's somebody with a skill set, or that the team is developing that skill set to be more innovative. So we need to be doing some leadership development and maybe some recruitment to the team as well, to make sure that there's somebody in each seat in this, all four of these quadrants is filled. I'll go through number 3, and that's using levers for change. These are controversial, and I have mixed feelings about all of these, but these come from a colleague of mine at the UC Berkeley School of Business. And the first one is saying, if we want to shift culture, let's bring in people who demonstrate the behaviors of the culture that we want. So maybe we're bringing in clinicians who have more data experience, who have experience in values-based care, or we're bringing in clinicians, because we're not very team-oriented, who come from a high team environment. I think that's great in theory, but we have to be careful then of how we're going to mix new people with a different skill set on orientation with the existing people in the organization, so we don't end up with that old guard, new guard issue. And we've all been there. I've been on both sides of that. And it's not comfortable for anybody. I think we can mediate that certainly by doing some reorientation for our existing people. So if we're saying, we're moving in the direction of being a little more data-driven, or we're moving in the direction of being more innovative, let's give some in-service time, some meeting time, some creative time for our existing teams to explore that, not just in a classroom and when we're done, but on an ongoing basis. And as we mix people in, I think it's going to make for a more comfortable process. Also having clear goals for everybody. Here's the direction that we're moving, being very transparent about that. Orientation and socialization of these behaviors. You bring people in and they're new employees, and what's the first thing that happens? But the existing people surround them and say, well, here's what really goes on here. Here's how things work here. And so there's an informal socialization that occurs in our organizations, and we might want to be thinking about how we socialize people who are new to the desired culture that we want. And I think that's a really important step. Again, that transparency, but it's happening with the entire team, not just those who are new. Finally, with rewards, I was raised with my leadership development mentor telling me never tie cost of living increases or increases in pay to your performance appraisal process. It really doesn't work. Now, that's because she came from Clan. So I would say that somebody who was very market focused might say differently. However, I have found it very difficult in a situation that I would share where I'm telling someone, you're not really performing at the level that we want. I'm really wanting to support you. We're going to give you training. I'm going to be spending more time with you to be meeting the goals of the organization, and trying to make that a really positive conversation, and then saying, oh, and by the way, you're only getting a 0.5%. We're only getting a 1% where everybody else is getting a 3% increase, or you're getting none. That kind of deflates the conversation. So I'm hesitant about that. Some people do it. In terms of the performance review, and I'll just kind of finish with this. I have a colleague who worked for Microsoft, and they did 360 reviews on a quarterly basis. Edie, can you imagine being a supervisor having to do 360 reviews every 3 months? That's all you would be doing. And they had certainly a software system to support it, and I don't think they did the entire team. But if we're making a change to culture, and we know that we've got some old guard, we've got clan that are kind of maybe resistant to that change, I don't know that a 360 is going to be the way to go. Hierarchy really drives what I call the annual review. It's like once a year you get a feedback, and it's kind of, you're fearful going in because you don't know what your leader is going to tell you, and here it is, and oh, surprise, you're doing great, or no, you're not doing great. It kind of is part of that whole fear culture thing. I think we're seeing as a trend across all industries as some people are eliminating org review altogether, or they are doing a very frequent, maybe a 6-week review on a very narrow goal, and things are changing rapidly. I think that's great for shifting towards adhocracy. But what I love most is that individual goals are tied to organizational goals and performance, so that everybody, in the hierarchical performance review, there's a lot of rules. How are you tardy, or are you on time? And are you productive? Are you a team player, or are you not a team player? And you're getting these check boxes that kind of are indicating if you play by the rules. And with this other market focus, it's a very fluid performance review where we're writing out a goal for each individual and saying it's got to tie to how we're performing as an organization and your contribution to that in some way. I think it's very meaningful. It's can be very collaborative. It should be that the employee clinician, even if a volunteer is being subject to some performance feedback, is getting involved in setting that goal for themselves and then helping to evaluate themselves as well. So before we move into the specific things, let's talk about.
Let me ask you a controversial question, because if we were in person, people could throw tomatoes at me, so I might not do it. But you can't really throw tomatoes at your screen because it won't help you any. But it got me thinking when you were putting the performance evaluations up, information. I've always believed that if you don't know what's coming in your evaluation, then there's something wrong with the supervisor, because it's our job as supervisors and leaders to let people know how they're doing and performing while it's happening, not at the time of the performance eval. So I liked that, but then I got into thinking about the huge controversy we have, not just in our field, but in education, in anywhere where there's a human being who's supposed to reach an outcome. And I often feel that people should be evaluated by how well our customers do when they leave us, or whether they've met our goals, or their goals. That's what I was trying to say. It was a lot of times in behavioral health, it's our goals, not their goals. But if the job is to have someone come into you and meet some kind of goal, and 80% of your participants don't ever meet their goals, but you have great productivity, you know, and you're making great revenue, does that mean you're doing a good job? And I know this is controversial, so that's why I'm doing it under the protection of video. See, Chaku's not throwing anything at me. That's why I love you, Chaku. But yeah, what do you think of that? Because I don't think it's wrong to be judged by our outcomes.
No, but what's the criteria for success? You know, I think back to.
But wait, that's a good question, and I'm being really clear about it. The criteria to success is that the person who has come in has requested some things or worked on requesting some things, and that they feel satisfied and successful in the interaction they had with you. So I'm really clear about what that outcome is.
I think back to the 90s when we were heavy in fee-for-service, and the criteria for success was very narrow. It was utilization and productivity.
Yep.
And certainly in a value-based care environment, we're more concerned with our outcomes. How are we doing? We're shifting our focus, and it doesn't happen overnight. And I think we're moving from person blame, if we're not meeting outcomes, to system blame. And I don't want to be blaming anything, but it's really looking at what's the root cause. And so I would say if the organization is not meeting a certain level of standard or goal, that everybody is then transparently given the information of how we're performing, and that people are invited, formally and informally, to contribute to a process improvement. So we're focused on the process at that point instead of the individual. And I think there was a period too, I think this was very evident with physicians, and I see it with allied health and mental health as well, where we would point the finger and say, you know, we're pointing the finger at you because you made a mistake. There were errors even in the process of delivering medicine. And hopefully in the last 30 years, we've moved to a new sphere to say that's probably a process issue. If our processes were standardized and put into place appropriately, we wouldn't have errors for physicians and on the medical side. And I think across the scope of all professions in healthcare, that our processes are supporting that best outcome. When they're not, again, you're going to hear my quality background come up. I'm trained in the Dartmouth microsystems method. So we're going to the front line to say, how can we fix this? And that's when people's goals are, you're participating in the improvement process. That may be an initial goal. Awesome. For people to really feel like they're involved in that improvement process. They have a goal to help fix it, and that they have some accountability as well.
Drew, someone's asked, I don't know if you actually can answer this one, and if not, that's fine, because we know that it just may not be in your background. But someone asked that you talk about organizational alignment to recovery values and best practice standards, considering the elements of person-centered care and shared power in practice. That's what I'm saying. You could certainly speak to organizational alignment with recovery values. I don't know how up you are on the other pieces, but please, if you can't, that's fine. But if you can, would you please?
I want to just put the grid up, and I'm not going to back all the way up, so I'll put this one up here. I think that as we look at healthcare as a whole, and maybe I think of like a hospital system, I'm going to expect to see more hierarchy, maybe more market. And when I look at maybe primary care, might begin to see more clan. I want to see teamwork. We're going to hurt people in medicine. On the physical health side, we are going to do harm if we don't have good communication between everyone who is providing care, whether it's hospital or an outpatient facility. When I look at behavioral health organizations, I'm going to expect to see more clan. And when I look at peer support services, I'm going to expect to see more clan still. I'm a little surprised to see the amount of hierarchy that came up in the poll, although we haven't formally measured our organizations. But we're going to see a more person-centered focus, I think, as we go up the continuum into behavioral health, mental health, hopefully, and peer support services by the nature of what we're supposed to be providing. So that alignment has to at least be balanced in that direction. And I think the challenge is now we're saying, oh, and we're facing value-based reimbursement, and we need to be more data focused. That's going to put tension on that clan value, and I think we've got to find the balance. And I think it's, like you said earlier, it's that transparency is the key word to finding balance. I hope that answers the question, or at least in that direction.
I muted myself as the big oil truck came up my driveway.
Do you have any comment on that, Edie? I mean, what's your thought?
I think that I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I think there's the piece that goes with this for me is that you can change organizational culture. So there's a number of comments here about how do you handle this and how do you handle it when the higher ups don't listen to the mid people. How do you align the values? I think that somewhere the mission of your organization has to clearly embrace the values of recovery and person-centered, respectful practice. And if the mission of your organization doesn't embrace that, it's very hard to align anything to it, because you're not your organizational your policies, your procedures, your actions have to be aligned to your mission. So I think that if that's the case, you get into that assessing for organizational change, and at the level of organizational leadership, there is no dissatisfaction with the current way that they do things. So nothing is going to change. So as a mid-level leader, you would have to begin to get the upper level management to really look at that value system that they're functioning under. So I think that that's where it gets difficult to create change from the middle, because they're trying to change organizational policies and procedures, but you really have to change organizational culture values. And I think that we need to separate values and mission from policies and procedures. I don't know if that makes some sense.
But also align.
And align them, yes.
And I think that what you're also saying is that when I hear the term the higher ups are not listening, that's a sign there's some hierarchy that's going on. We know what's best. It's also a sign of a leadership that's probably 9-1 or a little more goal-oriented than people-oriented, because we have to be listening in order to understand what's happening. We know from research back in the 50s, 60s, outside of healthcare, that organizational leaders who are involving the front line in change, they're listening, they're allowing them to create processes and not just do top down, that there's a lot more productivity, a lot better morale, but the outcomes, the financial success is also improved. So, there's a lot of reasons, not just because we're maybe being more respectful of people, but we're also seeing a more healthy financial outcomes with our organization. It's what the research is telling us.
And I'd like to comment on that, because there was a comment in the chat box that says that person-centered care, that there's a natural disconnect between that and a pressure for productivity and billing. And I would want you all to think a little bit about what Drew just said, because even though I'm a social worker and I am, as you all know me, a recovery advocate since the 80s, I also was the CEO of an organization that was that was funny as you spoke about. I thought you were talking about my organization. We were a government-run facility that privatized and became a nonprofit. And I began with 16 government people. And I was like, are you talking about me? But but we, recovery services are extremely productive. And when you're giving people what they want and helping them achieve it, your productivity goes through the roof, and then your money increases. And so, I am a manager, and I speak with folks about shifting to recovery oriented service provision through a very administrative lens, and bring up what you just brought up, which is that when folks are getting what they want, they tell other folks about it. Lengths of stay are shorter, which means more people in the front door, which means that you need to market yourself in a different way. And so there's a lot of business things that go into that. But person-centered work is not really counter to increased productivity. It actually, as you said, it goes hand in hand.
Or outcomes.
Yes.
I think there's also this, we have to kind of rethink that perception that we're looking at data and we're looking at outcomes, and is that counter to person-centered care? And it's absolutely can be in concert to it, because we're saying what can we do to improve how we're serving people. But I like what you were kind of saying earlier, Edie. It's not just about the setting that you're in or the market drivers. It's about your leadership approach and really using that 9-9 team style where leaders are listening and interacting in a more empowered way, empowering people who are going to be able to move into a more creative problem solving, to have better productivity. It just doesn't happen if somebody's just giving orders all the time. I'm not saying that we don't have some kind of controls and policies and procedures, but what I'm saying here is that we have clear goals for everybody, and we're all kind of moving in the same direction.
So I can't even read all the chatting this has generated. So everybody read your chat box, and Drew, we're going to print this out for you so you can read it afterwards. But your responses are fabulous, and there's a lot of discussion about how to do this. How do you get started? And I will tell you that you can create a recovery-oriented, person-centered, respectful treatment facility and make money off of it. But it's hard, and it takes not only leadership, it takes buy-in, and it takes actually assessing your organization in the way that Drew is talking about. It's extremely important, because if you are in the hierarchy box, but you're trying to have a clan culture, and you're thinking everybody is being, everyone's being ornery. Well, they're not. It goes back to your comments this morning, Drew, about name calling. This one's ornery. This one's a rogue. This one just doesn't care. This one just wants to roll over me. That's not really the issue. The issue is that the one that isn't doing what we want sees life in a different way. And our job is to help them see life in the right way, in the recovery-oriented way, in the person-centered way, so that we can move our organization in that direction. It's a lot of hard work, and it takes a huge team, but it can be done.
And I want to acknowledge we're only scratching the surface here talking about leadership style, because if someone is in middle management, they've got maybe an authoritarian body of leaders above them, or maybe individuals. I think there's a reaction sometimes to start to be overprotective and to shelter team members from that style. So I want to acknowledge that that's a normal reaction. It doesn't help the organization, but that's why I believe in doing leadership development at all levels. I've done it bottom up instead of top down, because we're giving feedback to senior leadership to say, here's what you need to do to support your teams. It's not just leadership style, it's skill sets, it's resources, it's having sometimes an outside person listen and report.
I'll say, I again, read the chat box, everyone, because great stuff in it. But before you move on, I'll read this last one, which I love. Sort of like a restaurant serving food based on the feedback from the patrons, rather than the chef just deciding what you should eat.
I think I would have recorded a couple of sessions for Open Minds this week, but I am a big proponent of focus groups. And some people will say focus groups are dead. But I have personally, when I've done some startup support for organizations that are brand new, and just getting a pulse check to what are people's concerns, what are their privacy concerns, what are their quality perceptions about the services that are going to emerge. It's so, I think it's golden to get that kind of feedback. So hopefully we're getting ongoing performance feedback as well. I'll put these just back to the sort of simple look at this particular framework. Again, it's sort of a skeleton. I don't think it's, I've worked with other culture systems that have 16 quadrants, 32 quadrants you can't possibly measure. So what I like about that is it's simple enough for us to see, and our culture, we know we're feeling it in our gut all the time. But I really have loved being able to measure this. I will say when you are starting to maybe think about shifting to a more innovative culture or a more market aspect of a culture, let's just make sure we've got some anchors that we're leaving behind in hierarchy, because we're going to have to give up something. In this time where we're needing to be nimble, we're going to have to unbolt some of the policies and procedures in our organizations, or we can't be innovative and turn as quickly as we need to. That's really uncomfortable, and I do want to be sensitive to that. But I think this is a basic tenet of total quality management. If you've got certain things standardized and you're not constantly having to reinvent, then you have more energy and time to be innovative. That's easier said than done, but it is, I think, very much possible. I've gone into organizations that did not have any policies or procedures other than some HIPAA, thing that they took off the internet that nobody really used or followed. What ended up happening is that team members, when they had a question, would go to another team member, how do you do this? And they'd make it up. So that's an aspect of CLAN that I think does not drive good outcomes. So if we've got some clear standards that we're following, we're certainly wanting to focus on compliance. I did a practice assessment in an organization that was billing about $40 million a year in Medicare, and there was no Medicare compliance program. And I asked the clinicians there, had you ever had a Medicare compliance program? They said, well, what's that? They said, oh, like, fraud and abuse and Stark, and oh no, we never had that. That really put them at serious risk of staying in business. So yes, we want to get those basic compliance things in order. We want to have some document control. Where can people go when they have a question to get that single point of a correct answer as opposed to somebody making it up? And what's evaluating our approval process? Can we, do we have to have 5 layers of approvals, or can we have 1 or 2? Can we really be more comfortable with pushing down people being empowered to make decisions in an organization and trust that that will happen, or having clarity about what can be approved at the front line and what needs to be approved, certainly in senior management. I think we've got a lot of organizations with the signature authority for finances that are a good example of that. So that becomes the anchor into hierarchy. I think if we can do some basic things there, it gives us some freedom to move into other directions. But I think sometimes we could tend to ease up a bit and not feel like everything's gonna go crazy and loosey-goosey, as one of my CEOs once called it. Let's look at CLAN having high-performing teams. Again, on the medical side, I just see some real issues when I've seen serious sentinel events and medical errors occur because there was not communication from one team member to the next, or people were rushed, or people are fighting. I worked in an organization that had a productivity issue, and it was literally World War III between the front staff, office staff, and this is ambulatory, and the people in the back and the clinical teams were fighting. I said, if you continue this, somebody's going to fall through the cracks and get hurt. So we want to know that our plan is going to support safety, it's going to support the outcomes in a peer environment that we're really applying the sensitivity that we need in balance with being able to stay in business. And, are you able to spend 2 hours with somebody? Maybe not. Maybe it's an hour, but it's not a 5-minute encounter either. And so I think it's ensuring that we've got water cooler time. I keep hearing this as people are going virtual, Edie, that organizations that are successful are paying attention to the isolation that may be occurring with team members, and that there's some ability to let people, I saw somebody having a talent show, or having the ability or expectation that people are going to connect offline like they do when they're in the workplace. I am also concerned about excessive meetings that happen with plan, and I inherited a clinical team several years ago that had a lot of role conflict with leaders in the organization. They were responsible for doing all of the clinical orientation and onboarding with new people who were delivering services. And there was so much conflict that they really went high into clan. They were meeting with each other 6 to 8 hours a week, just having complaint sessions. You know the other word I'm thinking about. Complaint sessions about the organization and how they were treated and so forth. It really wasn't productive. So one of the first things I did to move them out of extreme clan is just to think about, do we really need to be meeting 8 hours a week? Maybe we're going to shift that to 1 or 2. Certainly we want to be having daily huddles and communications with our teams, and but monitoring excessive. So we put these anchors in hierarchy and clan, and I'll finish up before we go to our next discussion.
Drew, just before you go off of that slide, I'm just trying to clarify a question from Chaku. Who's telling me not to bother, but I'm going to anyway because it's a really good question. Do you think that this is really better for a board to engage with? Is this an operational level of measurement? Is this something you do during or after a strategic plan? Where would you see this kind of analysis being best done?
I love this question. Thank you. I do see, first of all, that a board should not be that involved in operations. Ideally, they should be involved in governance activities that have to do with their fiduciary duties and oversight, and strategic planning and financial monitoring to ensure the health of the organization. And it is the executive director or the CEO who is probably managing a lot of this. I think it's great for the leadership team to be informing the board about some culture changes that are being made, and that in order to fulfill the strategy that has been identified by the board, and in executing that strategy, the board is informed of this activity. But I think it can become dysfunctional if a board is over-involved in operations. And in terms of the question of where does this kind of come in, when we are thinking about strategy, I encourage a culture assessment as part of the strategic planning process. I know some of your members had attended our Performance Management Institute strategic planning seminar last February, and met some of your constituents as well, who had some feedback for us about how they were thinking about the cultural process and cultural change as part of their strategic planning, But I would say when it comes to that execution, that should happen at the staff level. When we are needing to move to a market orientation, I want to make something really clear. We saw that grid where we could actually graph our culture. I'm not saying that you need to move from clan to market by 30 points. I'm saying it might be 5 points, but we're moving a little bit in that direction. We're taking an incremental step. And I think the important thing is for leaders to be transparent about what we're trying to accomplish, how it's impacting the organization, being transparent about strategy. We talked in our strategic planning seminar about using infographics and having your strategic plan in an image or a picture, kind of a right brain aspect of that strategic plan that's on one page for people to kind of see where we're headed. Oh, and having regular meetings, we're needing to be able to show our outcomes. This is going to be our future strategic direction. And we're going to start by getting some baseline data. We're not going to be going after people. This is not a witch hunt. This is a systems issue. And if we're not performing as well as we hope we're performing, we're going to start doing some process improvement and involving all of you in the process. So it's that transparency that I think helps us move towards market and helps prevent that backlash of the clan. I was working for a community hospital that was Catholic based, and nuns were on the property, an incredible set of values and sense of compassionate care. They were very entrepreneurial, but when DRGs hit in the late 80s, they were providing tertiary care services that just couldn't survive. Their organization was losing between $3 and $5 million a year. And they brought in, after a string of CEOs, somebody who was from the for-profit world, who was able to just adjust their managed care contracts to get paid appropriately, get leaders, particularly clinical leaders, to start paying attention to data, census data. How are we doing with length of stay? Are we staffed appropriately? It wasn't an assault, but it was a pretty big change. And he also set up some competition. He made the environment more competitive. There were competitions around cost savings and so forth. He really turned the organization from the red into the black and did a beautiful job on the financial end. But in a clan-based culture, coup d'etat eventually came. I've seen this other times. So we want to, as we're driving market, just have that transparency, take small steps, recognize the clan and engage them in the changes, and be data focused. I think can be positive as opposed to being hit on the head with it. As I mentioned, if we're wanting to be more innovative, we're bringing people together to do some frequent brainstorming. Again, we can bring the people we serve to the table as well and brainstorm with them. Have them brainstorm with a team. I think leaders who come from hierarchy, and I've been there, it's like, we're going to bring people served to our quality improvement meeting. Oh, we're going to air some of our dirty laundry. And then I come to reflect, it's like, well, they probably already know. So why not bring them to the table, bring our frontline staff to the table and get everybody to start innovating instead of asking permission and feeling like they can't contribute, and that there's a forum for that. You know, some people might start with the suggestion box, but I would say as much as we can do for people to feel safe, be doing that in teams and having a structured agenda for it is great. And having speed versus perfection. If we're going to be fast, we can't be perfect. And how do we balance that? In the corporate, I went into corporate medicine for a while. It was really fascinating. Yeah, you need to have this done by next week. It's like, but I'm used to being a nonprofit where it's perfect, and I had to kind of let go of some of that. Finally, I'll end here with surprise and delight. because I think that when we're surprising people with a surprise lunch, a cake in the morning, we're doing something that is just out of routine that delights people. We're moving them a little bit into adhocracy, something that's just fun for the day, or we have a guest that comes in and it's just a really nice big deal. I do want to mention back to market, when we're using data, I think data can be a beautiful way to be shifting culture a little bit. But one thing I'm seeing in organizations, Edie, is that people will put up dashboards in the break room. They'll put it up in the hallway where people served can't see it, so it doesn't always have to be public. And they'll start putting, here's our survey data on satisfaction by the people that we serve. Here are some of our clinical outcome data, and they begin to put that up and we publicly acknowledge it. But then I'll go into an organization and I'll see that the whiteboard there where it was written is either blank or that data is 6 months old. And if we're not consistent with data, we're not really shifting our culture. That's flavor of the month. And I think as leaders, we've got to make sure that we're being consistent with data and really being serious about it and being very positive. Again, instead of using it as a weapon, using it as a way that the team can come together to participate in improvement activity. As your homework, I'd like for you to reflect on your culture, its functions, its dysfunctions. Are there shifts that you'd like to make? And we've given some strategies today. While brief, I hope that these can be very powerful and that you can consider them from your own framework or perspective, and maybe take in one or two change ideas. You don't have to change the world on the basis of this session, but if you can take one or two nuggets, I think we've done some great success. And repeating our slide from before, let's not judge where we've been, but your system is perfectly designed to get the results that it's getting, and your culture is embedded in that equation. And I want you to be using planned and strategic and incremental changes, not feeling like you have to move the world.
Well, Drew, again, that was wonderful. I do have a couple of questions in the chat box that we could get to because we still have just a few minutes. So how do you support leadership in sort of shifting? It really is what they're asking. The question was, in unlearning power over attitudes and behaviors to be more inclusive of peers and recovery supports. Most have good intentions, but yet they don't quite get there. So I guess we're really asking, how do we help leadership to shift from one quadrant to another? And we're not talking about folks who don't care. We're talking about folks who do care, but just are a little misguided.
Let's just look at the root cause. We have been raised in our families with certain values and certain approach to hierarchy or empowerment since we were growing up. And we've also been educated and perhaps mentored in organizations with certain leadership styles. So it's not easy to change, but I would say that leadership development is a key, but it is a process and an ongoing process, not a one-time thing. I've worked with leaders who said, oh yeah, but I did that leadership thing, like, I've done that before. And it's like, well, you did that 10 years ago, and a lot has changed in the world since you did some leadership development and education and skill building, but you've changed too. So I think that this change does not happen with our own behavior overnight. It is a process that happens over time. We have to be taking steps and trial steps, and we make mistakes, and we need mentorship, we need support. Even CEOs, people in the C-suite need that as well. So I think it starts with an ongoing, I'm not going to call it leadership development here, I'm going to call it skill building, because that's what comes with driving culture.
Yeah. You know, I'd like to share with folks before we go. There's a very simple clinical tool that's guided me through my career and change. And it'll take me a second to go through it. It comes from Bill Anthony from the Center for Psych Rehab. And if any of you are as old as I am, you remember IPRTs. And it's called a Psych Rehab Readiness Assessment. And you can look at it organizationally, and it goes like this. The first thing is that there has to be some form of dissatisfaction. And that can be either internal inside of us, like we know we have to change, or it can be external, where someone is asking us to change. And that's where that bottom up comes. So if enough people feel like leadership needs to do something a little different, that can be external dissatisfaction. The second one is commitment, which means that you have to believe that change is going to be useful, positive, it's going to be supported, it's going to be useful. So remember what Drew said, and that what we were talking about, that it would bring more money in, that it would make us more stable, that it'd be better for staff retention. It's another way to affect leadership, to affect C-suite people. The other is environmental and self-assessment awareness. And it's just that people may not have known any other way. They may only know the way they were taught, and they may not know anything. So you bring in other suggestions. They may not really know about their own belief system. Is something getting in the way of them moving in this direction? And that might be something that one could address. And the last one is a sense of connection and personal closeness, which means somebody somewhere needs to be the leader. And if the leader isn't the leader, then I think, it's why I said it's easier from the top down. I remember I used to say to folks as we went through the changes, that I'm going to be here with you, and we're going to make all the mistakes together, and then we'll move forward. And so someone has to be able to say, there's a commitment to this change, and I'm going to move there. All of those areas can be improved and increased. So if someone is low in those areas, there are ways to bring them up to speed. So change is a process. I think Drew said that a number of times. You guys have been talking about it. One of the comments, Drew, here was outstanding, real drilled down organizational development work. And I think that's the idea for me, for you to have gotten out of Drew coming to speak with us for this period of time through the seminar. And that is that change is really possible. It is, it's able to be done. It needs to be supported, and you can do it. There are ways to assess it, and to move forward with it. Drew, people really wanted the two other, before I forget, the two other resources that you brought up for assessment tools. And if you say them one more time, I'll write them down. And as you're saying your last words, I will put them in the chat box.
First being Jay Hall's Styles of Leadership Survey, which is published by Teleometrics. And Teleometrics was absorbed. They're part of a bigger organization, but you can Google that. But it's Styles of Leadership Survey.
Okay.
The other tool I use frequently alongside of it, because I think they're very complementary, is the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument. Because
Thomas Kilmann, what was that? Conflict?
Thomas Kilmann with a K, conflict mode, M-O-D-E.
Got
instrument.
it. Got it.
And,
okay.
That's published by the same company that does Myers-Briggs and some other psychological assessments as well. But I think that they're very complementary because our leadership and our conflict style kind of go hand in hand, and as we kind of think about evolving our leadership skills, those go together. And I would part by just sharing it is a leadership commitment, and it's also going back to saying we don't always have all the skills, and we do make mistakes, but do we have the right people on the bus? And do we have people in the right seats? So as we look at who can help drive the direction of our culture and our organization, do we have people in leadership? Do we need to bring on new members or develop members? But those are decisions that do need to be made.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for staying with us. Thank you, Drew, for spending your morning with us, your early morning with us. you still have a whole lot of morning left. and really, it was a wonderful presentation. And I want to remind you all who are here, stay on the line because you can see the lovely shiny faces of Harvey Rosenthal and Len Statham, and they will be joining us for closing remarks. And we're just a couple minutes before 1 o'clock, so please stay on board. Don't leave because the other room will be coming in. So again, thanks so much to Drew DiGiovanni, and I am going to have the two of us X out now and let you be with Harvey and Lynn. So thanks again. Thank you, Drew.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Drew and Edie. I hope you folks can hear me. We're just waiting for people to come in. And Len, are you here as well?
I am here, Harvey.
Good. Good to see you, Len. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a good half a day. The seminar's been really, really very interesting.
Good. So we're
Yeah,
live,
my
right?
side too, since I'm still here.
Yeah.
Yeah, our workshop was great, and I'm sure that Eve's was as well.
So can I assume that we're live for who was ever here?
We are live. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, great. Well, let's just wait till a couple more folks come in. We have 99 folks in the room now, so that's good. We haven't chased them away yet. See some people coming in now. And I guess we're supposed to start at, was it now we're supposed to start?
At 1 o'clock, there are people leaving the trauma workshop and coming in now. So we give it a couple of minutes for them to move over, and then we can get started.
Sounds good. Daniela says people are coming. While we're waiting, I'm going to put in the National Council workshop for those who are interested in. We have time. Okay, are we ready, folks? Glenn, you think we're ready?
I think we're ready to go, Harvey.
Okay, great. Well, can we get the discussion slide off the screen, or is that okay? I guess we'll just go with it. So listen, I want to thank everybody for being with us today. This is the end of our 3-day virtual seminar. This was originally a day-and-a-half live program in Albany. But of course, because of the virus, we had to make a decision, and we had a good team discussion, and this is what you now have hopefully enjoyed the last 3 days, is the program broken up over 3 days and virtually. Certainly the feedback I've been seeing throughout is that this has been, as I've experienced it as well, a very extraordinary set of presentations today and teaching moments, and that the speakers were particularly very wise and cutting edge and pioneers in each in their area. I like the comment that Pat said earlier about we being part of a big tent. That's always been very important to me. And I think that the diversity of people, some people would want to go see Pat Deegan and some people would want to go see Drew or Eve, but our big tent is that all those people are welcome throughout, whether it's all the different workshops we've had. So it really speaks to the diversity of our community. Speaking of diversity, I thought it was really pretty amazing that in the Pat Deegan workshop, we had participants from Denmark, Norway, Israel, Pennsylvania, and Kansas, although they're not countries, but they're also were there. And we had people who have a diversity of backgrounds, as I saw it. There were self and system advocates, there were provider leaders, both peer and non-peer. We had a number of NIAPRS members, we had a number of government officials, folks from academia, the managed care folks, and our staff. I want to thank our team who really did a wonderful job. There we go. Eileen, who did a very comprehensive job throughout. You probably have got emails from her throughout or through the term NIAPRS Inc. I think that was all Eileen. She did really a wonderful job from stem to stern. And I want to thank our management team, which includes Ruth Cologne Wagner and Daniela Labate and Len Statham, Ellen Hillian, and Edie Schwartz, our consultant, who really played a role throughout in helping us to design the program and run some of it. If you go to our website, you'll see a whole range of resources there. You'll see the recorded webinars of the 2 days before with the PowerPoints. And you'll see these workshops that you just saw on the web, probably, I would say by tomorrow, the recorded webinars and the photos, the PowerPoints. You'll see a whole host of resources, including one we just put in on COVID resources. You'll see the different services from NIAPRS across all the ribbons. You'll see the collective, the policy, economic self-sufficiency, peer services, etc. You'll see information about other webinar series. You'll get daily postings from me and others about the e-news, about news of workshops, grants, what's going on in politics, organizing events, etc. And you can sign up for that bottom right screen of the homepage. There's a search function on the website. More than likely, it's going to take you to some older postings from the e-news, which go back many years and have all kinds of links and articles. You can sign up for a training. According to the button on the site, there is a clearinghouse of curriculum for PROS programs. There are past conference materials and workshops, and there's even a photo gallery. So there's a rich amount of resources on our website. We're in the process of upgrading it, but even as it is now, it's rich with resources, and we hope that you take advantage of them. I'm going to turn it over to Len. I don't know that we have that much time, although, if people have comments to make in the chat box, hopefully somebody is checking it out. We're certainly happy to take a few comments at the end. But Len, would you like to comment, please?
Yeah, thank you, Harvey. I'm so delighted that you all have dedicated over 10 hours online to spend with us over the last 3 weeks. And we truly appreciate your interest, your energy, and your passion. And as Harvey indicated, we have a lot more webinars on the way. So you want to pay attention to our website. If you don't receive Harvey's e-news, make sure you visit our website on a regular basis. And Harvey, one of the things that most impresses me about NIAPRS is our ability to respond to the changing healthcare landscape. especially during times like this when people really need us. And even more importantly, it's the people that have joined us on this seminar that are willing to do the hard work of transforming services through leadership, through innovation, and really a deep commitment to others. And I just want to say thanks so much for taking the time to be with us.
Don't forget, too, that there are CEU credits for the range of credits that we have. So if you have any issue with that, please contact us. So I guess seeing nothing in the chat box, thank you so much. You're thanking us for all we do. We appreciate it. Back to you. Thanks for what you do. Is there a questionnaire, like an evaluation tool? I don't think we included it this time. I'm sure we will sort of going forward.
Yeah.
And again, there's a lot of thank yous. And you are what it's about. The people we serve are ultimately why we're all here. And hopefully everything we do, what we've learned today and the support we offer and the training that we actualize and the skills we bring forward ultimately are really about the people we serve, and that we're promoting the recovery that Pat talked about. And if you were there for Pat's, I hope you saw that we're part of a long tradition that came to improve the world for people who have these diagnoses, folks like me, and that all this, we're part of a tradition now, and everything we're doing now is steps ahead of where we are, and there's steps ahead of us. And it is NIAPR's sort of mission, from the board on down to the staff to our members, in all our events, through the lobby days or the conferences and events, and through what you do every day on the ground to support the people in a life of recovery and dignity and choice. So we want to thank you for all of that. Please stay safe and warm and well, and we'll see you at the next event. Ellen, there is actually an event you're doing on Thursday. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so there's a lot of questions around the stimulus checks and recipients of Social Security. And we have our expert from Cornell University, Ray Sabula, and I will be taking questions about that on Thursday at 12 o'clock.
Okay, and then finally, even though it's, we're colleagues with the National Council, and I'm going to be on a webinar with Tom Hill and Joan King at 3 o'clock on leveraging peer support skills in COVID-19, and I hope you join us. The link is right there in the chat box if you go back up a little bit. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you, and we hope to see you soon. Stay safe.